the danger of excluding the 20% completely is if this next government fails, well, then that party, the AFD, will be able to say the failure is nothing to do with us. We have clean hands. We have an agenda. Give us a chance. They've doubled their vote in this election. They could increase still further.
Let's start, though, with Germany's national elections. And the Conservative Christian Democratic Union's Friedrich Merz is now working to start coalition talks with the Social Democratic Party. Now, Merz is promising to make strengthening Europe his absolute priority. The far-right AfD party got its best ever result, while Chancellor Olaf Scholz's SPD collapsed with its lowest share of the vote since the Second World War. Sir Simon McDonald was the British ambassador to Germany. Sir Simon, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Can you tell us what you know about Friedrich Merz? What kind of a chancellor is he likely to be? All I know really is that he essentially lost a power struggle to Merkel and left politics for a couple of years.
He lost that power struggle a long time ago. He's very experienced. He had a successful career outside of politics. But unusually among many recent European leaders, he's someone with a long experience. So I think he arrives in the top job fully prepared, even though he doesn't have a very good relationship with Chancellor Merkel.
No, she doesn't speak very fondly of him at all, really, does she?
No, I think you can say that she did her level best to end his political career. So it's a sign of his resilience that he managed not only to withstand the most powerful person in his country for the 16 years she was chancellor, he also rebuilt his career and managed to overcome both of the people that she preferred as her successor. So he has his scars and he's come through.
Yeah. So the coalition, we know, will not include the AfD, the far-right party, that got about 20% of the votes in the election. How will their lack of involvement in a coalition government do anything other than encourage some disillusioned people to support them even more fervently?
Of course, that is the danger, especially next time. That is reinforced by the fact that the almost definite coalition partner is going to be the SPD, which has just had its worst ever result. So the leader of the AfD last night was saying, how is this democracy when someone is punished at the polls and still remains in government? So the stakes are very high for this government. The Merz's reaction to that is to succeed as chancellor. But given the state of the economy and the state of geopolitics, that is going to be tough for him to do.
What should his priority be then? Because international affairs are going to draw him away from domestic issues, aren't they?
Inevitably. The war in Ukraine, I think, is at the top of his agenda. Rebuilding Europe, strengthening the European Union, I think, is not far behind. So he has a lot to do, but he is well prepared. And even in his early days in office, I think he will be able plausibly to present himself as the biggest, most considerable politician in Western Europe. So it's a tough task, but he has a better than evens chance of doing it successfully.
Right. I guess he's got to sort out this coalition as soon as possible, hasn't he?
Yes, and he's signaling that already. The detail of the election result is important, and it's not quite final yet. It will be much simpler for him if both the smaller parties, the Democrats and the Bundessaare Wagenknecht, do not come into the Bundestag. If both of them fail to make the 5% hurdle, the Bundestag will be rather smaller, and it will be possible for Merz plus the SPD to have a coalition with nobody else. If one of those smaller parties crawls over the threshold, then it will either be a minority government or he'll have to bring the Greens in, and then that will complicate the negotiation. It will make it longer for him to form a government.
Right. I mean, broadly speaking, Is Merz's party a bit like our Conservatives? Is it as simple as that?
It's not really like our Conservatives now. It was always a broader based, it was always an explicitly Christian party, which our Conservative Party never really was. I mean, our Conservative Party is under Kemi Badenoch moving rather to the right. I think Merz is resisting that. One consequence of that is the emergence of the AfD further to the right. So that the parallels are not exact, but it is certainly centre-right.
Yeah, how do you answer the critics, people who say, well, actually, why should Olaf Scholz's party, which has been rejected, go on to form part of this new coalition government? I can see why people get somewhat irritated by this.
Yes, indeed. As I say, that means the stakes are particularly high, because if this new government fails, well, then the SPD will have been associated with two failing governments, one after another. But the counter to that is twofold. First, there needs to be a government in Germany. There needs to be a stable government. And by far, the best prospect is a coalition between the CDU and the SPD. And the second point is that the SPD will be the junior partner. I think they will look like the very junior partner in this government. So all the key ministries will be held by people from the CDU. So will be new faces from the winner of the election.
OK. And presumably, I know Merz is very keen to re-establish Germany, if you like, on the international stage. And we know that President Macron is at the White House today. Listeners to Times Radio will be able to hear his press conference with Donald Trump at about 7 o'clock our time tonight. We know Keir Starmer's going there on Thursday. Is Merz really going to seek out potentially becoming part of some sort of nuclear umbrella arrangement with Great Britain and France? Is that possible?
That's looking way down the line, if I may say. Immediately, he looks like certainly the plausible leader of the European Union. Monsieur Macron is coming towards the end of his mandate and does not have the support of the Assemblée Nationale. Friedrich Merz is coming into the office in the bigger country. So I think we need to get used to him. He's going to be the biggest European player very soon, and he's going to be the biggest player for quite a long time.
Right. So Germany is back, and he does want to make a point, I suppose, that Germany perhaps does sometimes get ignored by the rest of Europe. Now, I'm not talking about the European Union, but perhaps more broadly. I can't imagine that Donald Trump spends an enormous amount of time worrying about what the Germans think.
I tend to disagree with that. I think Germany is one of the countries he thinks about most, if it's only to complain about. One of Merz's biggest challenges is on defense. That German defense spending needs to rise. With President Trump in the Oval Office, it needs to rise sharply and quickly. Finding the money to do that is going to be a challenge, given the weak state of Germany's economy. But that looks to me like the first task as he and his new government are compiling their budget.
And the idea that Russia might be allowed to at least contemplate, or being allowed to contemplate, rejoining the G7. What do you think of that?
I think there are 7 countries, and the European institutions are involved in that decision. Putin might have an advocate in Donald Trump, but right now it will be very difficult to persuade the others. The President of the United States can be a decisive person in Washington, but he still needs other people to agree with him when it comes to the international stage.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, Donald Trump's family, he goes on quite a lot about his Scottish mother, but actually aren't the Trumps German, the Trump family?
Trump was the original name, correct. But all the indications are that he is more interested in and certainly warmer about his Scottish ancestry than his German ancestry.
Right, OK. A question just from a listener, if you don't mind. The German election, how can any electoral system that claims to be based on proportional representation ignore 20% of the electorate. Well, Chris is referring to the 20% of the German electorate who voted for the AfD.
They're not being ignored.
Well, go on, answer
they
that.
have seats. They have seats in the Bundestag, and in the British system, parties get 20% and are not part of the government. So that's just how the system works. It is a system which is understood and supported in Germany. Nobody in Germany is doubting the legitimacy of this result. But as we're discussing, the danger of excluding the 20% completely is if this next government fails, well, then that party, the AfD, will be able to say the failure is nothing to do with us. We have clean hands. We have an agenda. Give us a chance. They've doubled their vote in this election. They could increase still further.
And their support, the AfD support, comes not largely from the East, but they are more popular in what used to be East Germany.
Correct. So there's a big protest element. There's a big element of missing out that even 30 odd years after unification, there is a feeling that the East has done worse in united Germany than the West. But many of the things voters complain about in the East are not really problems in the East. So one of the biggest issues is migration. Yet very few, or relatively few, of new migrants to Germany actually settle in the Eastern Länder. So it's a complicated picture. There has always been a right, a hard right even, element in German politics. It was the determination of the CDU-CSU that no party should emerge further to their right. And when Franz Josef Strauss was alive in Bavaria, the CDU-CSU absolutely succeeded in preventing any party emerging to their right. In recent years, that effort has broken down, and now we see the result, that the AfD is a big party and looks as though it's going to be around and requiring attention for quite some time to come.
Thank you very much for lending us your expertise this afternoon. We appreciate it. That's the former British ambassador to Germany, Sir Simon McDonald.